All right. Well, today, boys and girls, we're going to be talking about the story and the legend of the infamous George Trout. Um, it is a very, very weird tale. So I want everybody to take the idea that hemp was actually one of the first agricultural resources in the United States. Jamestown Colony and any of the old like Plymouth Rock kind of situations where white men came to America, um, they were told that they needed to grow hemp by the United States whenever we were forming. In fact, it was actually illegal to not grow it because it was such a cash crop. So imagine that you're living in a time period where you're not able to not grow hemp, like your government demands it because you need to provide for the people around you. And now we're in the total 180 of that, where it's systematic oppression, people of color just directly related to this issue and vastly affected by it, and a monopoly, an evil monopoly to stop us from getting this resource back out. So how do we go from 1776 to 2020? Because that's a large gap. A lot happens in like 300 something years of human history. So my understanding is around the 1900s, 1908-ish, there was a time where we had opium dens far in New York as the eye could see. I mean, they were everywhere. And a lot of these opium dens offered hash as a complimentary, thing. You go to the opium den, you were smoking some opium, you were smoking some hash. Now, I'm not here to attest for the legalization of opiates. I'm just stating the history of it because it's really interesting that New York, a few years later, around 1903, or I'm sorry, 1913, they established something called the poison laws. So the poison laws were basically that if you had a vial of tincture or anything available that was a medication, it needed to get either pharmaceutically approved. So there's the pharmaceutical industry entering the game, like, okay, we're going to work with the government. And if you're pressing out stuff on the market and it's not, sanctioned by us, you need to advertise it as a poison. So you're going to look at old vials all the time in history and you're going to see a giant skull and crossbones. Why would people drink that shit, right? It's because it was a medical substance that was not actually sanctioned by our entities back then. I think the pharmaceutical industry had a name at first for the people that regulated everything, and then over time the government changed that. But the very early onset version of that was these motherfuckers that they wanted to create a stronghold on an industry, and they saw that people were getting relief from their pain at opium dens. Now, at the same time, I'm going to also be the devil's advocate and say that opium dens produced a lot of chaos, and they were not necessarily the best of establishments. They had prostitution, they had degenerates of society kind of hanging out there. I mean, illegal gambling, like a lot of bad things were going on. Like every time we watch villains in movies, 9 times out of 10, they were hanging out in opium dens because that's where you got stuff done back in the day. So the government didn't like that a lot of Asian people opened up these shops. And it's a very different culture because when you go overseas, people use opium therapeutically and they actually have opium dens that are legal. So it's just ironic how far that came. And the reason that hash and marijuana and cannabis and all this stuff got created and entered into it is because a lot of these opium dens using hash as a tool, it became one of the things that were listed on the poison law. Because when they went to raid these opium dens and close them all down in New York, they were like, oh, wow, there's hash here too. So that must be a problem. So hash got on the controlled substance list very early. Not cannabis, not hemp, hash. Literally like hash, like the brown, like lovely stuff that we all know, that we get to keep from. That was the only thing that was illegal. So a lot of people started pushing out tinctures because they were moving towards manifestation, or manifest destination, and trying to go after the oil in Texas, and they were trying to spread around the United States. So what they did is they labeled all their tinctures with that poison law because it was required if it was a cannabis product. So it was like, you could have a cannabis product on the market and you could sell your snake oil, which is where the term comes from, but unfortunately, you had to put that skull and crossbones on it and call it poison. So you're going to see tons of old tinctures all in these like vials that have these skull and crossbones, the word poison on it, but it's really just medical cannabis that someone fused with some MTC oil or something. So fast forward to 1936, George Trout. The laws have been set up for hash, and the United States wants people to grow cannabis all across the United States for the purpose of trying to inflate the United States specifically, not the rest of the world, not Mexico, not Canada, not, India, which, by the way, India is pretty much where everything comes from, the Indus River Valley. I mean, it goes so far back as George Washington. His wife used to smuggle hemp seeds in her vagina. I mean, it's insane. Like, we have been trying to get stuff from overseas here since that American Revolution. And fast forwarding to the 1900s, it became very hard for cannabis in the different states to start producing all of these back end, as we call in the industry. So front end is when you're growing and you're producing all the hemp. Back end is when you're selling and manufacturing it. So the rift started right there. So George Trout was a farmer that wanted to work on working with specifically people of color, Hispanic people, and Chinese people. He did not want to work with white people very much. He liked the idea that Mexico had been growing hemp and knew how to process hemp a lot more efficiently than Americans because they were used to the humidity and the climate. And not too long ago, Texas was part of Mexico. So we have the same climate here. It became a really weird stretch up to the Rio Grande and the valley because people were able to grow really good cannabis in there. And it was all over the place. I mean, it was grown in the fields. It was wild because it was a natural part of the ecosystem. So keep all that in mind, that George Trout was growing hemp in an area that hemp was abundant. And he had no control over all the feral and wild hemp that already existed there. Cowboys were smoking weed left and right, throwing out seeds and letting it go because Texas was the cowboy promised land. We were fucking it up left and right here. All that rolling cigarette shit, that started with marijuana. That started with cannabis. And it's mind-blowing where we're at right now. So, our cowboy, George Trout, he died a broken man. A heartbroken and betrayed name dragged through the mud in the press. A lone star crushed by the state of Texas. And his intentions were good. He did everything the right way, exactly the way he should have. And the man clapped back. The man fucked with George Trout. And the man, possibly, if my evidence proves conclusive, created a dastardly plot to not only pull the resource away from us, but murder an innocent man and an innocent young boy at the same time, while systematically oppressing the black people of Texas. So, let's start. Legend has it that Prohibition started in 1937. This is known as the fall of George Trout. To those of you who have been paying attention to the history of cannabis in the United States, you would know this name very well. Rumors have circulated far and wide, and perhaps he was even one of the men behind Ford's hemp car. And as you study the dark and rich history of hemp here in the South, the trail may run cold a few times. I teamed up with a historian named Les Stark. Fucking amazing man. He grows hemp in Pennsylvania. Jesus Christ, dude. This guy has hemp everywhere. He has the research, the evidence, and we History Channeled this shit for 24 hours to figure out what really happened to George Trout. We had to know the truth because the second, very much like whenever we teamed up, him and I teaming up, we had to discover what the root of this was. There was so much misinformation. And this man, he did his due diligence. He paid a .com called newspaper.com for this subscription so he could circulate this information. So if you are watching this, please go check out this page and just type in Texas history George Trout, Les Stark. Les is spelled L-E-S, and Stark is spelled like Tony Stark, Iron Man. He has literally the coolest website about this information, and I'm going to only be paraphrasing his story. The reason I'm giving homage to this man is because he did a lot of the groundbreaking work, and I'm not going to take credit for that work, especially whenever his sweat and his blood and his tears went into this understanding. So we need to give credit where credit is due. It's pretty obvious that even the most astute historians think there's a great possibility of foul play embedded the entire time in this cannabis history. In school, we are often taught that the victors rewrite that history. It is those who have won the battles, held the religious or political positions, that make that power in some of these major issues that we care about. The lack of control is really unnerving and makes you wonder about the original American dream. One could often wonder what happened if this whole prohibition thing would have never taken off. Both sides can correlate in the weirdest of ways. Wise words once echoed to me that the grass is always greener because the roots run deeper, meaning that people that are in positions of power can stay there longer because of the nepotism, because of the family traditions, because of the sick stuff behind the scenes that we never see. Perhaps could understand these things as those who have gate-kept the farm, or have a better pick of the harvest. Maybe it's the rich elite simply retrying to take the resource, or simply it's all money, or maybe it's connections talking. So let's bring the rest of the class up to speed on why George Trout died. He was going to kick off an industry in East Texas in the Rio Grande. He was an opportunist in the best of ways, and an optimistic man, and a hard worker, and a true innovator. The story needs to be told and understood from a lot of different positions because there was a crossroad of an important part of American history, especially in Texas. Texas had missed their chance at something big because of an irrational fear and a drastic misunderstanding. And you may be wondering why a historian in Pennsylvania and why a pothead teamed up to try to figure out what the hell was going on. Well, we believe in justice, simply, and we also believe that the truth needs to be heard. You see, before we even knew about marijuana, hemp was grown in the United States as far as the eye can see. Nobody knew anything about THC contents. In fact, everybody knew that it was an industrial good. There was a separation that took place between the generational gap that phased out the idea that hemp was a popular product. You see, it is in the minds of the masses now that cannabis is a beautiful thing, but it was not always this way. A lot of us know the story of how prohibition turned into completely a monopoly and pretty much a systematic form of oppression. And what's really interesting is the word marijuana. Marijuana came into play right somewhere around 1918 when a schizophrenic Hispanic man who was high off of a number of known substances today, some of which included heroin and very early forms of methamphetamines. We had methamphetamines in the 1900s, believe it or not. And he was high and he shot a family. He was a very disturbed individual. And because it was a white family, it made national attention. And that's whenever marijuana really got posed into the game. So in the northern states, marijuana, we hear this word a lot. But in Texas, we have been dealing with hemp for such a long time. To us, it was just simply hemp and cannabis. There was no marijuana at all. The only time that this term really comes out of context is because it was based off the word marijuana, which is a Hispanic word. And it's really interesting how that word got loosely translated and almost demonized in a way to systematically oppress these Hispanic individuals living in Texas, because when Texas reclaimed its independence, there were some hard feelings there. So when they basically got into trying to figure out all this stuff, the federal government defined hemp as a growable product, but was looking to try to stop marijuana production because they had heard rumors that marijuana is what dirty, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't personally believe in this, but what dirty Mexicans were using. And this is literal terms that they use to create this, this viewpoint for white America, because a majority of Americans back in the day were 2 or 3 generations away from immigration. So they had been well-rounded here. Not really, but, you know, they pretended that they were well-rounded, and they were basically just trying to improve the system and help the system and grow and do all this thing. We're a new country, yada, yada, yada. So back to George Trout. He knew the difference between the marijuana and the hemp, and he had federal and state approval to grow at the time. So I'm going to pause for a minute and go to a political issue and pull away from George Trout, because we have to understand that our government in Texas was changing at the same time too. There was a governor named Paul and another governor that were trying to run, or basically someone that was trying to run for government. And he was a thick son of a bitch. He was a very racist man. And God, here, let me pull up his name real quick, because I don't want to misinterpret it and stuff. But Paul and Ma, Texas governor, is what you're going to want to look up whenever you're trying to find information on the government. And her name was Marina Ferguson. Marina Ferguson. She was known as Ma. She was the first female governor. So Paul, her husband, ran as governor a few times, and the Texas government decided that he couldn't run no more, that they were creating a system that basically made it to where Paul and Ma could stay in a position of power. And, her name's Moran Ferguson. Ma, she basically, alongside Nellie Tay Ross, was the first woman elected governor during this time period. And she served terms from 1925 to 1935. So it's right before the election. Interesting how we're reliving this parallel. Interesting how we're recircling, full circle almost, back to where we started. Even if you just look out the window, you get the dreading feeling that nothing has changed. It's just like 1937 all over again. And her running, her contender was a really racist dude, basically. And it's really crazy how she basically was going up against this guy, and she lost, because the Democrats and the Republicans back then were kind of flip-flopped, and they didn't want nepotism in politics. That was their big ruse. And this guy, he did not like Hispanic people. He did not like anybody of color, basically. And he created the campaign with Harry Anslinger and many other elites to try to boycott hemp and any type of material that would be considered helpful for people of color or anybody else to get ahead that wasn't the white man. So fast forward to from 1935 to 1937, Ma lost the election. This new dude is in power. Let me get his name real quick, because I don't want to. Thank God you can edit this, right?
Yeah, it's all going to be edited, and I'll take everyone's name and include it all together with everyone.
Ma Ferguson verse. She went against. God damn it, what's his name? She was part of the Republican Party, and she went against. She defunded the Rangers, by the way. That's insane. She was very pro hemp, very on side of just very naturalistic too. God damn it. It's not pulling up anything. Political life, fourth term, second term. This was during the Great Depression too, so this was really important to keep that in context, that we were just pulling out of this, and there was a lot of information that was being just kind of pushed out there against people of color and making sure that they couldn't go further. She lost to.
Is that it? What did you do that? Yeah. What is the dude's name?
Thompson. Thank God I got it. His name was, the son of a bitch was Ernest O. Thompson, and he was a railroad commissioner. And by the way, his wiki page pulled down, rewriting history very, very much before our eyes. Very interesting. So we're going to go back to George Trout, knowing that the Texas political climate had just shifted, knowing that we just pulled out of the Great Depression. George Trout's big scandal and death happened basically in 1938. So 1937, he's alive and good. In 1938, he's dead. So let's bridge that gap real quick to figure out how George Trout, from year 1 to year 2, kicked the bucket. My guess is that hemp was grown very early in Texas and that it thrived in certain conditions and periods, like it did in Kentucky and other states. The potential could be seen by a lot of people, and further research will reveal in history how much of that is true. Through newspaper.com, we've dug through a couple of articles, and I'll read off some of those headlines so we can trail George Trout's journey. Every single one of these, by the way, has a permalink available. And to do you guys even more justice, we will be providing the links for all of these PDFs for free for y'all, so you can hear the entire unabridged history of George Trout. So you can share this information just as easily, and you can get woke too. So we'll go back a little bit again. April 20th, 1872 talks about the importance of hemp in Texas in a newspaper called the Dallas Daily Herald. In 1970, there's another report about the large quantities that Texas is about to produce. So George Trout hasn't even gotten into the picture yet, and hemp is really booming here. In another article in 1837, it says that the Texas soil yields better climate than the entire United States for hemp growing. So we were poised and positioned. We had the bow, the arrow, and the target all lined up. We were ready to go. We were ready to shoot. We were ready to fucking hit that mark. And we got derailed. In 1901, it's pointed out that Texas was the prime grower of oh, wow. So we were the prime grower of fiber in the United States. We were known as the garden spot, quote unquote, of the South. Man, that's crazy. The soil was best observed. It was known that the western part of the state, the wild, wild west, was where Texas was going to take the hemp capital. No reliance off oil, which was going to be needed. We were going to create cars out of hemp. We were going to produce Fords. We were going to make this fucking country actually great, dude. It was going to be beautiful. We had the textile industries. We had the fucking plants. And though we were racist as fuck and using slavery, within time we could have changed that and utilized these resources and positioned people of color to run these operations to create a beautiful new future. But unfortunately, that did not happen. In 1905, a man from Indiana made his fortune in hemp, and he came to Texas, and he was convinced that the industry in Jefferson and other counties could be part of the Texas thing. He said if people were willing to invest, if there was anything to invest, hemp would be the best thing. You see, the soil, the climate, the conditions were perfect. And anywhere from Houston to San Antonio, this was going to be the best thing. And George Trout was following this like a pulse. This man grew hemp his entire life. His mom grew hemp, and he knew that chickens could be fed by it. He knew that he could create jobs. He knew that he could do wonderful things with this new idea that everybody could have this resource. In 1924, experimental hemp crops were grown in San Benito. A man named Hubert was looking in the region for anybody that would invest, and he was trying to find the quickest and most profitable form of hemp because he worked in Kentucky and Missouri. He said that the richest soil was in the valley. And this was from the Houston Post. So now another article by the Houston Post in 1928 is boasting now how great the Texas Gulf is at producing the best hemp in the world. It's stated that they get 2 crops a year, which, by the way, I'm a hemp farmer, and I can fucking tell you it's way better now. You can get up to 4 crops a year through greenhouse methods. Cannabis grows on a 90-day cycle max, man. So out of 365 days of the year, whew, that's a lot of hemp. So things were getting really serious. People were making money hand over fucking foot. We were building an economy. Things were great. And he knew that even in Italy, they didn't have the acreage that he had. They knew in California that they didn't even have the acreage. I mean, you can look at the pineapple haze current from Washington, which is a very real thing. You can look at the Indus River Valley having some of the best sun because of the location and everything, and that's a really good thing. But man, Texas was going to be the king. And it was planted in Harrison, Brazaria, and Fort Bend, and basically everywhere. In 1935, the Navarro County turned 3 crops that promised additional revenue. The number 1 listed was hemp. And the possibilities of the future were fucking endless. Endless. So that's like 8 articles that I've been able to pull up right now talking about hemp in different dates and different time periods, in the 1800s and in the Industrial Revolution, in the Great Depression. They were trying to pull people out of the muck. We were trying to rise like a lotus. It's crazy because then the Daily Sun said that there was a 2-week meeting and announced that there would be 12 fields of work that would bring new industries and create new sources of revenue on a platform looking for the potential and possibility of growing hemp. So man, year after year after year after year, we're hearing this. Keynote speeches by Texas East Chamber of Commerce President A.G. Pat Mays, he stated that it was observed for a very long time. And he noted and advocated for all the industries to help build up this vast section growing in East Texas. He loved it so dearly that he says, and to return nothing to him but respect and admiration. So what he was asking for was not money, but the Industrial Revolution to take really hold there so he could grab and get respect and admiration. He just wanted to grow the community as a community leader. The guy wasn't looking to even make money. And that was our Texas government back in the day, man. It should also be stated that they honored a Mr. Marvin Kelly in this newspaper by the Longview News Journal. So our government was even on this side. And then Ma versus Pa and this son of a bitch, right? So Kelly was the president of the G.A. Kelly Plow Company. And he was the son of a famous Texas resident who was known that Kelly Plow, it was a household name to these people. They knew it, just like we know Kellogg's, just like we know Johnson & Johnson. Kelly's Plow was a notable name in Texas. And man, this guy, he said, made the sound counsel and his broad vision and his broad patriotic interest continue to guide this community in the state for many years. And unfortunately, by 1938, it fell on deaf ears. So on April 10th of 1936, there was a report that in Longview Journal that out of the extensive investigation, they concluded that hemp was the perfect fit and the only hindrance would be large investments. So they would need money. That was the game. You needed money to make money to create this outcome so you could produce all these plants. So the biggest industry hurdle that we had in 1930 was back end. We had front end covered. We had our, what's out, and we were doing it right. But when it came to creating the goods, when it came to creating the textiles and the plastics and the goods, we were pretty fucking clueless. In fact, the only person that had a grasp on it was Ford, the first inventor of the car. So It's really weird how things changed, because there seemed to be a lot of energy and enthusiasm about the revitalization of this industry, because people had just kind of grown it as a feed. And now things were turning into, dude, let's make some motherfucking money. Like, let's make Texas like the forefront. We got the climate, we got the area. Let's do it. And there was just all of this build. And then out of nowhere, 1930, reefer madness. Fuck, we've heard that term a lot. It's similar. It's a buzzword. It's like what we were talking about earlier with the names. When you create something as powerful as Houston High, you create a name that people can stick to see. Reefer madness is very much the same thing. It creates an insinuation. You know, reefer being a dirty drug, madness, crazy, psychosis, psychotropic. We hear all these words. It's all a game to these people. They use word insinuation to try to control us. So it caught some hysteria, because they were trying to insinuate the two. You know, Harry Anslinger and the administrations, the paper industry. It's very ironic that the paper industry was threatened by him, because where did we get our information? The newspapers. So think about it. The newspapers wanted to stop him because it would have destroyed the newspapers. Interesting. Very interesting that our form of information, the thing that we use to communicate, because they didn't have cell phones and they didn't have the internet and they didn't have Zoom and these meetings and YouTubes of today, they had the newspaper. And the newspaper kept pushing out this propaganda. And on the same day, on the exact same day that this fucking newspaper published this news article, another newspaper published the enthusiasm between him and the results. So now we hear a dual narrative forming. It's crazy, because California was the one that really kicked this fucking shit off. Texas was the founder of the prohibition, but California was the one that started the battle. You see, they arrested an individual that had under 2 ounces in his dresser drawer, and they created something we know as the marijuana tax stamp. You see, the poison laws weren't enough to make money. They weren't enough to punish the Chinese and the Asian culture for creating the opium we had talked about. So they needed to stick it to these guys. They needed to let them know that these rich white elites were going to control the game. They needed to know that the Federal Reserve was in charge. They needed to know their place, quote unquote, because the white crazy elite man had his out, and he didn't want anybody else to get in positions of power. Texas, however, was not deterred. We were not New York, and we're not California. So we had decided that even though farmers being caught up in California and told that planting hemp was a violation of the state's narcotic laws, we were not going to follow that, because we were not forming flour for the dangerous drug marijuana or hash. We were forming an industrial revolution, and they could take place in it if they wanted to. A lot of those farmers, however, had the feelings that a lot of these northern Yankee folk were the carpet baggers, carpet bagging type people. So regardless, 1936, an article gets posted where George Trout talks to the Awanas Club on October 23rd. Now, I'm going to deter for a second. On October 23rd of 2019, I was sitting there writing the very things that I was going to testify against our nation, our state, on these laws that they were forming. You see, they had created an open public statement kind of thing where people could go voice their opinions on this issue. And on October 23rd, literally a full circle since the George Trout situation, I had to put the pieces together for this story. I was on the phone with Les Stark October 22nd. Ironic. It's so ironic, because when I talk about this man's death, you're going to see the irony. You're going to see the dates correspond over and over and over, almost like it was planned. He talked to this Awanas Club in Raymondville on October 23rd, and the Kiwanis Club. And he told about the culture of hemp in Raymondville. This was according to the Longview Journal. So the Brownsville Herald a week later announced that the production of hemp was about to proceed on a large scale. The price of hemp processing equipment was the only barrier that George Trout had to meet. His personal investment of $15,000, which I actually did the math, was equivalent to $1 million of today. So this guy was an actual well-built entrepreneur. He had the money to make his vision come to somewhat to light. And by getting the investments, he was ready to take the first test run to process hemp in the state of Texas. This was the first time that a decornicator was being used to process hemp. In fact, he used and translated his decornicator, he modded it, much like we do today on video games, much like we do today when we create our new skins for our things. He created a new system on an existing machine. He was a genius, and he reworked the ingenuity because a decornicator could not process and break up hemp properly. So he put together some brilliant minds, and they created essentially a giant grinder. And this grinder can still be found in the Rio Grande today. My friend Rudy Montez has actually seen it. Amazing, right? That we're actually able to track down this history. We're actually able to see the world's largest and first cannabis grinder. And he was going to process this hemp through this test run. I gotta take a bite of soup real quick. My mouth is so fucking dry. October fades and November 1st starts. 1936, the excitement is buzzing around as we started to build this new industry for the Willacy County, and great opportunities for the farmers there. They talked about the many uses of hemp, especially the excited potential of hemp's cellulose material that they create this thing called cellophane. You see, cellophane was plastic essentially. So there would be no need for the plastic industry. Funny, right? We could create a good that the earth would break down in a matter of time. No more plastic bottles, no more nylon, no more anything. We just needed one resource for it all. A resource that could grow so much faster than trees. A resource that was infinitely flourishing. Because if you chopped it down, it'd grow right back the fuck up. You see, people call it a weed for a reason. Because it is so invasive as a species. And that's the beautiful thing about cannabis. It invades the minds and hearts of us all. You see, the decornication plant that was being built 5 miles outside of Raymondville, the giant grinder, so to speak, was by George Trout's Hemp Association, the first Texas Hemp Association. There's millions of them today, but George Trout, damn, he created the world's biggest grinder, and he was the first fucking association. This guy was rolling with the fucking punches. He was the Elon fucking Musk of cannabis. And he was going to establish hemp in the largest portion in the world. He was going to grow the biggest fucking fields the world had ever seen. He was ready. He had established this network, this beautiful, beautiful web of cannabis that was going to grow everywhere in the state of Texas. He knew the climates. He knew which strands grew where, if Durban poison or if blackberry cherry or if white widow. Back then they had different names, but he knew where they were going to go. He had a vision, and he had an association, a committee of people dedicated to making sure that we could all find where all of these places and pieces fit. It's great that he was able to piece together the puzzle before us hemp farmers in 2020 and in 2019 were able to grow. Because I now, in the hundreds of thousands of people that grow now, illegal or legal and not, are able to process this information from this man's blood, sweat, and tears. It's just crazy how he was able to create plastic out of plants before we even had that as an idea. I didn't know about plant plastic when I was in 1996. I didn't know about it in 2012. I didn't know about it anywhere. I just knew that that there was a possibility that we could get rid of such a problem. And it's crazy how things have changed now. Now there is plant plastics out there. Now that information is easily accessible. But this man was 3D printing before we were even 3D printing, essentially. The excitement had just began, and hemp was promised to become such a large crop. It said that the soil of Williamson County in the Valley Morning Star's article was particularly suited for climate. Jesus Christ, we're hearing over and over, article after article about the climate and the culture and the brilliance that hemp was going to bring to our nation. Raymondville was exuberant. The editorial didn't even hide their enthusiastic optimism. They hailed the introduction of hemp and the decornication process as literally one of the world's greatest accomplishments. They honestly said that this could become one of the top things that people would go to see. A monument to history, a monument to the world, much like the Statue of Liberty, much like the pyramids of Giza. This giant grinder was going to change the fucking world. The world's largest grinder. It's still here today, and people are working on rebuilding it to get it fully operational so George Trout did not die in vain, so he could potentially go on to the next level. So at the end of November, it's pointed out that it was going to be planted in February of the next year and harvested in May. And the decornication process was going to be able to back end it in May. So we're at 1936, February 1937 is the day, and May of 1937 is when the public can now get this beautiful crop. They can now go out and buy it. They can sell it. They can do whatever they want with it. It's the day for the launch. And December 12th of 1936, the Valley Star headlines that the hemp decornication is ready for its first trial run. Through it, they had previously reported that the test run had actually already been done. It was a smashing success. No issues. It was perfect. George Trout can be seen beaming in one of the first pictures they had ever taken of him. There was very little photography back in the day. And the first picture we got of George is him just geeking out, smiling at his beautiful creation, at his gift that he had brought, almost a gift of God to the masses, to all people. You see, because he wasn't just trying to help the white guy, he was trying to help every man, woman, and child. And he admits this article after article, speech after speech. He was so passionate about trying to reestablish the trust in the Black community because he had personally seen the systematic oppression that had been pulled from slavery. He personally, on his acreage, on his own land, had hosted hundreds of people so they could have a right to work, so they could produce this hemp for him. And he was no hard manager. He was no hard laborer. He was no pusher of hard processes. He was a well-rounded heart. And if somebody had something wrong on the property, it was very frequently cited that George Trout would try to pay for the doctors, or he would try to help them himself by assisting them with money or aid. It was even stated that the people on the property, if the child was born on George Trout's land, George had to be present. George had to personally be there for that baby because he was that directly involved in his community. He was no political leader. He was a man of action and revolution. And he built such a good rapport with any man, woman, and child that crossed his path. It didn't matter if you believed in hemp. You had to smile at George because he just was always grinning ear to ear and trying to fill your head full of these beautiful, beautiful thoughts. His memoirs, his details, they're there on the internet, but they're whitewashed from history. We have to do a lot of digging to find this information because you see, I have to bring up that dastardly plot. Harry Anslinger had grown notice of George Trout. And the elites had grown notice that George was grabbing such gravity, that he was such an upstanding man. They knew the influence that he had would be borderline that of a public speaker that could vastly influence the nation. You see, George Trout was much like Martin Luther King. He was a man of influence, and he could speak to people in a way that they would listen. He brought tears to people's eyes when he spoke because they understood what he was trying to put across. It was announced that 30,000 pounds of seed had been received, and 700 acres had been contracted out. They said that the first major attempt was underway after the 2 previous trials of 2 successions, because he had to prove himself twice. He had to let everybody know that his trial 1 was not good, but he had to do it again just to be sure. He had to put the grinder in action because he wanted a monument to history. A lot of people say that might have been George Trout's biggest failure, was to not put his plan immediately in action. George Trout was a brilliant man, and he was a man of paper. He was a man to decide facts. He had to know if things were going to work out properly before he could finish something. He had to know that the experiment could be run before he put people's lives into the situation, not into jeopardy, but just into the situation. He was a man that didn't want to jack you off. He wanted to give you the straight truth and wanted to make sure that it was fully efficient and ready to go before he could even start the process. He was one of those guys that he would sit in the room and make sure everybody was on board before he started something, because he wanted the voices for the many to be heard. He wanted the person that had a problem in the room, their problem to be recognized before anybody else had voice in the situation, because if they were against something, that means that they were personally affected by it. And a lot of this can be said to insinuation, but if you read and listen to the man's speeches, you will feel the same empathetic feeling I'm trying to portray right now. Because none of this is fluff. None of this is insinuation to me. This is me hearing what this man had to say and listening to his speeches and reading his articles to understand that this man was onto something. And by God, I fucking believed him. I believed in him. And it sucks because I had to trail and I already knew part of the history. I already knew that he had died before. And as you read these speeches and as you follow this man's story, you come to the same conclusion that I did. That he was a good man. That he had a plan. And someone fucking got him. Someone knew that he would change everything. And they had to stop him for whatever implied reason. Money, maybe self-righteousness. I'm not sure. George Trout died of a heart attack. But we'll get to that, because that's what the official newspapers reported. The same newspapers that had a problem with George Trout's industry. You see, after the 2 test run successes and all of this growing and all of this thing, in spite of this, there was a slightly annoyed editorial that was posted. The Denton Record Chronicle on Christmas Day. Christmas. A day that we're all supposed to be celebrating family. Even if you don't believe in the idea of Christmas, it's a holiday for a lot of people and a day for us to kind of have togetherness. On Christmas Day, this editorial had posted that in the Lone Star State, a nasty drug was being run. They had posted that the marijuana, it's really even hard for me to talk about it, the marijuana plight on America would begin, and that Mexicans and people of color were about to rape white women. They were about to steal and pillage. They were about to destroy the hard-working American citizen. You see, they told us, and it states, and I swear to God, these articles are just deplorable. It's the only word that comes to mind, because they use this narrative of watermelons and of arrogance and of it's just portrayed and of separation, and they completely create what is known as a stereotype, a very negative stereotype of the African American man busting out of the hardships of slavery. You see, they had just gotten away from people treating them like basically animals, like property. And they had just left this hard back. In fact, a lot of the people on George Trout's land still had scars. You see, just because the Civil War had ended did not mean that it had ended in some people's hearts. There was negativity in there. They still were running the Confederate flag. They had put up advertisements everywhere that had said things like, you better not be here past sundown if you're black and such, because they were trying to create a diffusion, because by the unity of the masses and by knowing that if white people and Hispanic people and if black people and if Asian people and if everybody were on the same side, that the elites would have no power, that the Federal Reserve and Harry Anslinger and the current government in the state would not hold in these people that had been doing this since the 1800s, since the 1700s, the people that had came over here on the boats to try to control America, the Freemasons, all the crazy fucking conspiracy theories that you hear, they're very much true. They knew that by keeping and boycotting this from the masses, it would create avenues, businesses for them. You can't have pharmaceuticals if you have marijuana. If you have marijuana, you can't create systematic oppression. You can't break up people's homes. You can't raid them. You can't destroy their communities. You can't disestablish their leaders without creating this system. And they knew this. They knew this very well. In fact, they knew George Trout was up to something positive, and they reinforced it with negative stereotypes of African Americans and Hispanics and Indians. They literally used India, the place that had literally had such a positive production of hemp at the time. You see, indica, coming from that word, the Indus River Valley, it's all connected. It's the same reason why George Trout and George Washington smuggled these seeds to bring them into America from India, because we knew that by the collaboration of and the unity of other races and other people, we could promote a beautiful world. And it's just mind-boggling as we read through this story. After all of this, George Trout winds up dead. So nothing short of this agricultural industrial revolution was there. You see, George Trout had solved an age-old problem of fiber processing. The cotton mill and the decornicator were the only processes in place at the time, and without this, you needed vast human labor. We needed human labor. You mean like slaves? You mean like oppressed people of color? It's just crazy how we leave slavery and now we need a new fuel source for labor. It's interesting to me that slavery ends and now we're fueled towards trying to create solutions for these problems. And I mean, think about it. He solved the problem of needing a bunch of people in a field being oppressed. He solved it literally by creating this giant grinder. And on the same day, in another preceding article, it stated that an experimental station was being grown in all of these different freaking counties. Beeville, Angleton, West Loco, Denton, and Winter Garden. And they even described in these articles the best states for the public to plant hemp legally. In fact, they even in these articles explained how to process it yourself if you couldn't get your decornication done by George Trout. You see, there were newspapers fighting newspapers. It was insane. very much like today's parallels of the war of misinformation, Fox versus NBC. And all of this was unfolding in an age of innovation, an era of understanding, a phenomenon known as chimergy, the process of transforming agricultural goods into industrial products was forming. You're telling me we had the Minecraft juice of society way back in the day, and we were able to create goods that would have piloted us into the future? You're telling me we could have been doing space travel like right off the bat and all this crazy shit because we were able to get vast amounts of biofuel? We were able to go into the skies with this biofuel fueling our rockets and our jets? You see, it's all linked together, ladies and gentlemen. It's all connected. Chimergy is the natural alchemy of the world. It's not fucking magic. I'm not here playing Magic the Gathering and Harry Potter talking about some wizarding wand shit where we can create some powerful utensil that frees humanity. This is real science. This is the betterment of humanity that we're talking about. This ain't a flick of a wand. This is the real fucking shit. This is the real Wingardium Leviosa. This is the real fucking changing of society. And it's amazing to me how all of this seemed to be chugging along quite nicely. And then, out of nowhere, George Trout. You see, he's having to deal with the hysteria of all of these newspapers. The Currents and Times seem to produce these articles. One of them says industrial decentralization. And now it's in time to inject some hysteria, ladies and gentlemen. On June 23rd, of 1937. Very interesting how we're reliving the parallels again. Man, we're in June now. Crazy. It was announced that marijuana was being grown in Williamson for hemp. Marijuana, the dangerous drug, the one that Indians were using, the ones that all these dirty people, as they proposed in these nasty articles, this hate speech, literal hate speech written in article after article. And I'm going to say something that I never, ever should leave my tongue, but I feel like in this article, and please beep this out, but it needs to be read, that it states here in these articles, and these are the types of racists that we're dealing with. These are the headlines that we're dealing with, that Negroes will smoke marijuana and steal and rape your white women. What? Like, what? What? What type of evidence do you have to even make such a fucking heinous claim? Nobody in their right mind that has ever smoked weed is going to try to rape anybody. Nobody in their right mind smoking weed. Are you fucking kidding me, America? We're better than this. We're better than these news articles. No one in their right mind thinks this way. No one in their right mind uses this type of language anymore. And goddamn, the fact that people even thought shit like this just deeply disturbs me. It Alex Jones me to a fucking new level. It makes me go crazy gay frog on everything, dude. Because I just cannot believe the fucking shit that is pouring out of these articles. It's crazy because they even interviewed George Trout in this article, which we'll get to in a second. Brownsville Herald wrote on the headlines in another article that narcotic use of marijuana crops were found, and refuted that the Corpus Sheriff's governor asked to act on a large crop grown near Raymondville. Raymondville is where George Trout was growing all this mess. So, sorry, I had to see outside to see if it was still daylight. I feel like a tinfoil hat conspiracy when I study these things. I feel like I'm in front of a computer, just like, do I have the information? Do I have the documents, with my tinfoil hat on? So, June 23rd, right? It's announced that despite this immediately, it's weird because the article goes back and forth to support it and not support it in a weird way. It stated that the Texas Hemp Association and Corporation had $100,000 laid up in stock. And it's also stated that the corporation working the United States experiment was to determine whether or not hemp can flourish as a product, because George Trout, quote, knew about marijuana, but he stated that his hemp was industrial hemp. He stated that his flowers were for industrial use, and he was very aware of the narcotic version, but he stated that this ain't the same thing, folks. Like, I'm here to save the world. And just because you can use the flowers medically to alleviate stomach aches, don't mean I'm a bad guy. You see, George Trout, he was a realist. He was thinking, he was like, yo, why are you trying to push this propaganda to me? He's like, we're doing the Lord's work. Stay out of my lane, homie. Like, I got this. I know, I got the research. I got the mindset. I'm going to do this right. Don't worry. Like, I'm for America. Fuck yeah. You know, he had it in his head. And he refuted. He said that the 2,000 acres in the article was slightly exaggerated. But remember, hemp was feral all across the valley. So it's very real that George Trout did not know about the other hemp operations growing, or that there was wild feral hemp in different aspects. He does acknowledge that there is wild ruderalis growing, but he does not acknowledge that he has any part of it. You see, George wanted to have his ducks in a row. He's very much like me as a hemp farmer. We wanted to go by the T and letter of the law, because we know that even though we may not agree with it, even though it may be not the right 100% thing, we got to play by the book, because change is subtle. And he was supportive of these things. Even though he didn't believe in them in his heart, he knew that he had to play by the rules. We all had to. So he acknowledges that the species of marijuana is out there, but he makes jokes about it in the article so you can understand his feelings. He states that the Texas Hemp Corporation is incorporated under the Texas laws and sanctioned by the United States Treasury Department, which had fully investigated the company before approving him. So he had state and federal regulation, and not to mention that he also had the United States Texas Treasury Department, which works collaboratively with the Federal Reserve. Now, $100,000, remember how much George Trout had at first? It wasn't anything near that. It was like $15K. That's a lot of money to make in a year, especially in 1937. I mean, that'd be pretty much the equivalent to billions today. Interesting how they got the word that he was making the money. You see, George Trout, despite having a good heart, God had blessed him. And God had blessed him so well by giving him all of the tools to flourish. It's just tragic it got ripped away from him so quickly, because George Trout only had about 500 acres of hemp. He planted only 375 of that acreage, by the way, and unfortunately, he was under now investigation, because 125 of that acres was not clipped in time. You see, if you look at history, which I did, by the way, and you can look at the weather reports every day as far back as the system will let you. But in 1937, he was dealing with intense flooding and intense rain. The world was changing. Texas was forming new land masses and new things. And it's crazy what happened, because he was aware of all of these factors. And he knew that out of the 500 acres he had, a lot of it was getting rained out. It was just raining and raining and raining and raining and raining. And what does hemp do when it rains? Up, 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 up she goes. And it was hot and hot and hot outside. So THC is a cannabinoid that's stress reduced when cannabis is releasing its sexual pheromones so it can breathe. When we're smoking weed, we're smoking sexual organs of cannabis. We're smoking cannabinoids, 180 of them sometimes at a time. And THC is only one of them out of 180. And THC gets really hot and it creates new chemicals, new cannabinoids, or it can retroly reactivate and become old cannabinoids. So it's a very interesting chemical. It's like magic, dude. It can go back and forth. It's in, it's out. I mean, dude, it's insane. it literally can just translate forms. So he knew that his crop would produce vast amounts of THC, but the science wasn't really there. People just knew that if weed stayed in the ground a long time, you could get really high off of it. In fact, it seemed like the longer you left it in the ground, the higher you fucking got. So he was not able to clip his hemp. So an investigation got started. And this investigation was headed by the Department of Public Health, the State Department of Public Health, which is interesting because that's DSHS and DPS's former predecessor, which is now who's in charge of cannabis. Interesting, right? It's almost like we gave the keys back to the former slave masters. So before I continue this, you better be at Texas Sessions, all these viewers. You better be at the Capitol. You better be there on this issue because we meet every 2 years. And this legislature, this problem that got created in 1937 was because people didn't show up on this issue. And it's going to happen again. And we're going to have a whole new mess of George Trout's popping up. It's going to hydro. And it's going to become a problem if we don't get this shit fixed for full plan access. George Trout knew that. We know that. And the Department of Public Safety, unfortunately, knows that. And so does DHSH. And they've waged a war against full plan access. So if you care about this story and you care about cannabis reform, get in touch with your House of Rep. Get in touch with your senators. Get in touch with every motherfucker at the Capitol and office. I want you to get in touch with those college aides that are sitting up there with these fucking politicians. Because when I went up there, I wasn't able to talk to these politicians. They had a fucking gatekeep wall built up. And all I could talk to was all these damn college kids that fucking agreed with me. Yeah, we should legalize it. I fucking know. That's why I'm up here right now. Tell it to your goddamn senator. Where the fuck are they? So next year, hear the venom in my voice. Be there or be square. Because you ain't going to get cannabis if you ain't there. It's going to be like that. They are, this is the last battle. This is the Armageddon, the revelation, the fucking wake up call. The drummer is fucking tapping along, my people. And you got to fucking wake up. Because if you don't hear the fucking trumpet, if you don't hear the drums, you going to be asleep whenever they put us all away for this. Because they're still arresting motherfuckers. There are Apple stores that look like dispensaries. They look identical now. And we still got Texans in jail for fucking cannabis. I've lost people to this. I have had friends die in jail. They have timed out. They did not get out of prison. They died in jail over a cannabis clause. No more. No more George Trouts. No more fucking dead people. No more people in cages. This shit's got to stop. And George Trout fucking knew this, dude. It's crazy because on the same fucking day, there's articles that are posted where the occasional sheriff may become alarmed because of hemp's resemblance to marijuana and how it goes unnoticed in all these fields all over the country and why there's no reason for an industrial to start because it's prohibited. And the 17 experimental plots all over the Rio Grande, all of them are doing is they're helping fucking black people. They're helping the Mexicans. They're helping you know what? Damn right they were. And in these articles, these people should be fucking ashamed that they tried to fight that progression. They should be ashamed that they tried to fucking stop the systematic oppression, or that they were trying not stop it. They were trying to help that pipeline. And this created a school to prison pipeline. This created all sorts of problems, and they fucking knew that it would. This is just money making to them 101. So another article in Brownsville Herald on the same day as the Valley Morning Star states that Rangers, remember Ma, the governor, she defunded them, and this dude refunded them, the new governor. He's going to start probing the marijuana growing. And George Trout, a hemp man, decides, he denies the charge. Trout states that the weed in Williamson that he's growing is the non-narcotic type. And he announced to the Texas Rangers that the widespread cultivation of cannabis in the Rio Grande Valley was not his fault. He didn't know anything about it. He was just growing his acres. And if there was wild feral hemp out there, that was God. That was the universe just going, because I don't know what you believe watching this. So let's rephrase that. That was the universe going, hey, this is just nature doing its thing. That needs to be where it's at. And George Trout was like, fuck yeah, nature. You just grow. You just do your thing. Look, if something is growing in the wild, then it needs to be there naturally. Like, he got that. He was like, dude, you're going to destroy the ecosystem if you start taking this shit out. He came under fire, quite literally. You see, why were they investigating the hemp fields? Why were they doing all this grunt work? A man was discovered with a cotton sack full of hemp blossom that they determined to be marijuana. And he was transporting it. Interesting that this article also even goes to say that he was a prisoner that was being transported by law enforcement and that he escaped. He was a dangerous black man on the loose from the law. That's what the newspaper had told the public. I'd like to stop for a minute. And I'd like to say, despite all of these Black Lives Matter movements, this is very much the same fight. You see, the root of all of this started with them chasing a prisoner, right? That's what the articles say over and over and over. Wrong! That's not the truth. And I have discovered what the truth is. I had to spend time working with Les Stark to discover the truth. And what we fucking discovered was lies, misinformation. The dastardly plot I had mentioned. You see, it was not a convict that was picked up with a burlap sack. It was an 11-year-old boy. A young 11-year-old boy that was plucked from the field like a piece of wheat. He was grabbed by the sheriff's department. The Galveston and Rio Grande Sheriff's Department were the same thing at the time. They had a lot of area to cover. And they were fucking racist. They're just going to say it. They're a bunch of KKK members. You know what they did to that young boy? There was no trial. There was no jury of his peers. I have to stop right now and even just say why he was in the field. Why he was even out there. George Trout had requested him to go out there. He asked this young boy to grab flowers for his sick mother because he knew that the cannabis flowers would save her of her life-threatening condition. This 11-year-old boy on a term of faith went out to that field that day not knowing that he would die, not knowing that he would die in vain, not knowing that he would be hung from a tree, not knowing that he would be shown as an example, as this is what happens when you grow hemp in the valley. This is what happens when you work with black people, George Trout. And do you know what they did after they grabbed that boy and after they hung him? They burned his fields. You see, George Trout was an honest, good, hardworking man that had everything ripped from him. They attacked his workers. They arrested them. They hung several of them. They killed innocent people. And as I wrap my mind around this, I'm reminded that this is the same fight we are fighting for. The same night on October 23rd of 1936, when George Trout was talking to the Gowanus Club, he had African-American members that were told to stand in the back of the room. And this man said, fuck you, fuck that. He made the white men stand at the back of the room. And he asked the people that told him that to fucking leave. That he had no time for bigotry and no time to deal with their fucking heinous ass bullshit. In fact, it can be stated through my evidence that he even kicked one of them in the literal asshole to tell them to get the fuck out. Because he was pissed. He was so fucking pissed that somebody would try to stop people from hearing the truth. That children that are small and tiny could not sit at the front of the crowd to hear what this man said based off of the skin that they held. Based off of the effect that the sun had on their skin. That is the only thing that separates us, everyone. That's the only thing that does, is the ability for the sun to absorb in our skin. And he knew this. He knew that that didn't separate any of us at all. And it's fucking just crazy to me how the very next year, on October 23rd, the same night that he gave that Awanas Club, shit popped off. They burned all of his crop. They destroyed all of it, and they posted nothing but misinformation. They literally whitewashed him from history. They stopped him from public speaking. In fact, it's just mind-boggling how many times they stopped this man from prospering. George was heartbroken. It's stated that the Valley Star, in an article, I don't even want to paraphrase, I just want to read every single bit of it. He detailed the 550 acres of hemp that were planted on 5 to 10 acres tracts of land, and through a 15-mile radius of Raymondville, the largest tract of acreage was 40 acres. He took the exception of the fake news of the 2,000 acres, and he totally admitted to cooperating with the state in the best way. He advised them, he said, I did not intend to convey the idea that the plant was absolutely non-narcotic when cut at proper time for commercial use. I really didn't know. I really didn't. I really have never used it for that. I've actually never even used it for myself other than for health. I've never even met anyone who admits to using marijuana. I've never, because he thought marijuana was this dangerous narcotic hash drug. He thought it was, at one point, because of the misinformation they had distracted him with, this new drug that had formed. He had no idea that cannabis and hemp were the exact same thing. That they were pushing this idea of marijuana falsification. Nobody really knew what was happening. It was just so much information pouring out, article after article. He stated that the authorities intended to defer the definition of the development of the plant, and his understanding was not to be considered at what phase it was. It wasn't even intended for that purpose. He stated that he was growing for fiber use. He stated that in the article. Now, I think that George was simply trying to protect himself, and I think he did kind of divulge some misinformation himself because he was scared for his life at this point. Because after I read this date, George's narrative changes. In his memoirs and in his journals, they're published, he changes his vocabulary. It almost sounds like depression had set in and that someone had punked him pretty hard. I remember when I got beat up one time, my language had changed. And for this, I totally have a different narrative now. I think that he had some scars that had formed. And though I cannot find any conclusive evidence that he was beat down, I feel it in my heart. I really do. Rangers probed on June 28th, and there was another article delivered that drug smuggling had been probed, and that a reliable source that there was an activity of smugglers that intended to draw this hemp production after they found out about the escaped convict. 11-year-old boy is what you mean. How can a convict be an 11-year-old boy? The Monitor reported that the hemp fields would be guarded while they contained narcotic content. On July 1st, a day that is very near in the future, a day that is going to reciprocate all of this, because we're probably going to see a full circle once more. Hemp growers are assured that cultivation is legal, the same way that I assure to all of my patrons and all of my clients that hemp is legal. It started in the article that farmers in the lower Rio Grande Valley need no fear about growing commercial hemp because it was declared by Colonel H.H. Carmichael, Chief of Public Safety, Department of Public Safety again, in an interview with the exclusive Texas Capitol News Service. He stated that today he's turning over samples received from Ranger Captain Bill McMurray Be sure to remember that name. That fucking KKK racist son of a bitch, Bill McMurray. I had to actually call up the sheriff's department in Corpus. You want to hear something interesting? Corpus Christi Sheriff's Department has no record of this escaped convict situation. And after 3 conversations with them and the head, you know what I discovered? They don't keep a record of people they hang. And by the way, Corpus Christi Sheriff's Department believed in 1937 in justice by hanging. So you're meaning to tell me that the cops are the one that hang this poor innocent boy? Fucking A. Fucking A. Especially today. Especially right now. Cops hung this boy? You mean just like that's happening right now in our state? If this doesn't radicalize you, I don't know what fucking will. We're literally living a time loop. A repeat in history. A glitch in the matrix. A total fucking full circle, full cycle, just rabbit hole of what everybody could call the greatest conspiracy the United States has ever fucking known. Because it affected everybody. Texas is the forefront of agricultural industry. It's beautiful, really. It literally has so much surplus that we are literally almost as independent comes. We literally could provide for ourselves 4 times over any state in the United States. What happens to Texas happens to the United States almost immediately. There's no trickle effect. We literally we run this shit. I hate to be super like Texan patriotic, but we really fucking do. New York don't run shit. California don't run shit. DC don't run shit. We run shit. No farmers, no food. No agriculture, no goods. We cut you off, America. You are fucked. You will not have anything to eat. You won't have t-shirts. You won't have shit at Walmart. So you better fucking back our ass up while we fight this good fight. Because Texas Hemp, we coming back up, baby. We ain't getting deterred. We ain't dealing with this shit no more. You ain't taking our babies. You ain't taking our fathers. You ain't taking our mothers. You ain't telling us that a plant can cause chaos. You cause the chaos. And we know now. On the same day, the Morning Star reported that there was no authority on banning cultivation. This is June 1st. The officer explained he had heard that hemp had some narcotic properties at a certain time, and the concern was that if it did get in the wrong hands, it would cause harm. It would cause harm. Yeah, to your fucking refrigerator, bro. Fucking idiots. And it could be falsely sold as a drug. Yeah, shut the fuck up. The next day, the Valley Morning Star reported that the hemp analysis stated for the week echoed that growers were assured that there would be no action taken. So, all right, day after day, we're hearing, nothing's gonna happen, and the safety production of hemp. But no action would be taken to halt hemp production. On July 4th, the Valley Star read, hemp crop approved. Williamson County farmers are assured state officers might investigate, but you can continue growing their commercial crop, whether the test showed non-narcotic or not. And then the next day, the news hits. Arrest made in Williamson County. The 3rd arrest made from someone that had cut hemp fields. The same people stating that nothing wrong would happen arrested people. And on July 6th, they said that hemp leaves were supposed to be in making some kind of special tea. The fuck, man? That is the most, like, backward ass, like, yeah, fuck this, fuck that, fuck that. And then the next week, they're like, oh, hang on. You can use the leaves in tea, and you can use it for therapeutic uses. It's just mind-boggling, this dual narrative going back. It's like a fucking tennis game. So the Valley Morning Star carried another article on July 11th that said marijuana can be grown in the valley, so look out. And it states that some of us are prone to smile at the recent investigation in Williamson County. From the appearance, it was a water haul and a brief sensation, yada, 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 yada. And all I'm reading here is that they didn't view the Williamson County as a situation to be alarmed. No reason to be alarmed. No reason to be alarmed. I'm pretty alarmed that they were hanging black people. That's pretty alarming to me. It's pretty fucking alarming. So, whatever they want to say. And then the very next day, so here's another article. It's reported that the hemp analysis would have to wait because there had been a jailbreak. Laboratory men were too temporarily busy assisting major crimes cases to analyze hemp to see if marijuana. They're basically testing DNA. DNA testing and delayed hemp testing. Yeah, okay. July 16th, the Brownsville Herald posted its editorial stating that Williamson County News feels that an injustice has been done as a result of the public surrounding the charges that marijuana was being grown commercially and illegally in the county. It's also stated that fiber production had been there for quite some time. So it's really weird that the Texas Hemp Corporation and George Trout had been given a special permit to grow, but they had been fucked with by the man. They were like, the federal authorities readily granted this permit to this company at a tremendous expense. Remember, George Trout had invested $100,000 of investors' money. Gone. The only thing this dude had left was a D coordinator and a lot of fucking tears. And he had to set up all of this expenses, all of this contracting, all of this game planning. It was all a wash. The company, it also continues that it had endeavored to place a new industrial in Williamson County, and it had expended just almost all of its money. He was basically bankrupt. And to make a venture successful, they would need more money. So it was an article trying to help traction. Be like, hey, if you can invest money into this, there's money to be made. But god dang, like he's dealing with some real shit. And it even states as a direct quote that it might be an excellent idea for the party who started all this fuss in Williamson County to clean its own backyard first and get rid of the county seat of gambling devices and other unlawful activities. Unlawful activities being the persecution, the rape, the pillaging, and the destruction of black property and the murdering of black people by hanging. That's what it means by unlawful activities. That's what the cops were up to. I called the sheriff's department myself on 3 separate occasions and backtraced, only to get on the 3rd phone call the final answer that they felt justified in hanging people back in the day. And that was just justice. And that's the way I'm supposed to just acknowledge it. I'm just supposed to accept that that's how we did it. Yeah, okay. Two days later, there was a brief report. One of the rangers in Williamson County investigated the hemp situation, was suspended after he was felt guilty of a contempt of charge. It's in the Brownsville Herald, and you can go look up the charge. I'm not going to state it because it's super heinous, and I don't feel like reciprocating or giving this guy anything other than, hey, you can check out the article yourself. But that was our police force back then. That's what they were up to. So, yeah. And then the steady stream of bad press and undue hysteria became too much. Finally, the whole thing that broke the straw on the camel's back was the hemp industry was finally over. On July 26 of 1937, Brownsville Herald ran the final article that was just the nail on the fucking coffin. The governor bans hemp crop in the valley. The same governor that the entire time fought tooth and nail. The same governor that gave the funding to the police department. Under the headline on this story, it declared that order crops destroyed in Williamson County and permits were being denied by the state. So the state decided that the federal government could go fuck itself, and that the laws that we had decided as a people, all actively together, were no longer valuable or even important. In fact, they said that they were draconian. Really ironic. So now we have a bunch of tests being disclosed. The Neches County authorities held over years that arresting had been for possession of drugs. Williamson County had been fields had been abolished, and there was no possibility of stopping this drug because the weeds had grown all over the valley, and George Trout couldn't stop it. Oh man, blame George Trout, the marijuana farmer, the guy that was working with them dirties. They keep saying the word dirty in here. It's fucking disgusting. They're the dirty ones. And it's just crazy how back and forth the articles go. Brownsville Herald, under a headline, declares that after it was destroyed, the governor, James Alfred, a new governor, had announced 580 acres of hemp that had been destroyed in the valley, and that the crop would no longer be permitted for fiber purposes. He goes, quote unquote, quote, from the days of the Persians of old marijuana, it has been one of the most dangerous and deadly narcotics. I am much more interested in the crop of humanity than the crop of fiber. They go hand in hand, you fucking dumbass. The Indus River Valley, the first story of civilization, the first fucking people that were here on this planet. The Indus River Valley grew for fiber. That was the crop of humanity. That was the first thing we used. Where do you think Adam and Eve's fig leaf disappeared to? They had to use fiber. They had to use something to build it. What do you fucking think they made it out of? Even if you don't believe the Bible, even if you don't believe any of this shit, Indus River Valley, the first civilization on the face of the planet, they discovered two things very early in their civilization. Indigo dyes, which were fucking mind-boggling. We didn't even know indigo was a fucking thing. And hemp. And it's just crazy. It's just like some dude walked out, saw all these pretty flowers growing on not literal flowers. I mean, like, we know what the flowers are. But these buds growing on a thing, and he goes, huh. Whoa. This is like the coolest thing ever. It's fucking mind-boggling. In fact, it's so mind-boggling, I'm going to tell you, it blows my fucking mind. It blows my mind that we were given God's greatest gift. And it makes everything so fucking beautiful. I hope this story has just totally helped gain some perspective on it for y'all, by the way. I really hope that it's opened like y'all's mind to what we're battling on a real scale, my dudes. Because this is a very real war. It's been the same, the narrative. There it is. Yeah. So, the article even goes so much further to say that dispatches from America revealed on Monday that the recent laboratory trust had shown that the drug was highly narcotic. So you mean samples that you had sitting in a lab that you just let them age out and the THC content to froth up? So you used faulty testing and then you burned all of it down so we can't even prove if it was really cannabis or marijuana or what it really was? He stated that he outlawed it, and cannabis sativa it's off the map now. He also stated that the future of Texas Hemp Corporation is indefinite. It's just fucked. And he also told it was impossible to establish a system to protect these cannabis fields from theft, because if George Trout wanted to stay in the business, he would have to depend on foreign countries. He would have to depend on foreigners. Oh, he would have to depend on non-white people to make this business run efficiently? We can't fucking have that. That's what they said. So Brownsville Herald, on a future date, publishes another article. Can you imagine that? Another fucking article about this shit. An American businessman, a Texan, who told the country or who was told that the country would rather rely on foreign products that could easily be produced, and rather than manufacturing in America. Williamson County wasn't the only place to have their hemp crops destroyed. Ellis was on the radar next. Follows a lot of hanging, by the way. We can't even get into Ellis tonight. It is literally a 4-hour discussion about how many times Black people were hung. It is just disgustingly disturbing how fucking, like, this went from one valley to all over Texas within a year. Like, they were like, oh, a lot of people are working on these hemp farms. Let's just go after all of them. And damn.
Hey, and we'll definitely have to come back on another segment. Yeah. But yeah, man, let's if you want to wrap it up, man. I think this
for sure.
A lot of questions, man, for everyone. We're gonna bring this back, man. I think Wednesday we're gonna do a rerun and pick it back up. There's a lot more.
Yeah, that's perfect, dude. This is like it goes deep. It goes deep. The fields of marijuana were destroyed, and they reported about 580 of them. And Alred already said that it's a dangerous drug. So, I mean, geez, there's like 30 more pages of this, guys. I think, honestly, everybody pretty much got the total story. I think if you heard all of this information, you got well-rounded with George Trout. And I'll conclude with this. George Trout tried to fight this. He went to Chicago to file a federal lawsuit, all right? And he got on a train. He never got off that train. The coroner report that the nation was told in these articles was that it was a heart attack. And it wasn't a heart attack. George Trout was in really good health. Excellent health. Had a little bit of a beer belly, but damn, he could take it. It was frequently mentioned that George was a fighter, and that he liked to box. So I have a hard time believing that a boxer that used cannabis died of a heart attack. However, it could be concluded that a heart attack could have been unsought by a poison. And it's very realistic to think this. And here's why. There's no official coroner report. There is only a news report. It's also interesting to me, and I'll conclude with this, that George Trout was literally on his way to fight this on a federal level. It's also interesting to me that whenever I went with Les Stark to try to investigate this, we spent 3 hours on the phone with multiple people trying to track down this man's gravesite. It cannot be found. It's very interesting that his grave disappeared out of thin air. Tombstones get destroyed all the time, but he was literally scrubbed from history. In fact, a lot of these articles and information came from newspaper.com, and that's the only source I have available. What does that tell us? It tells us that somebody along the lines didn't want anybody finding about George Trout. Well, I'm no detective, but we put the work in. And, yep, that's the plan. That was the plot. From the get, it was to stop George. It was to stop people of color from succeeding. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Cannabis was made illegal to keep every non-white American down. That's it. There's no other reasoning behind it. Zero.
Hey, man, we do appreciate your time, dude. We appreciate the story. We're definitely going to pick it up, man. We're going to have a round two and do this again. But, man.
No, I know. This was like 2 hours.
Yeah. Great ice opener, brother. But, my goodness, dude, what a story, man. What a story. Look forward to next time, man, and see what we're going to be talking about then, my brother.
I appreciate you. Thank you for allowing me to share this with the masses. And We appreciate on a real scale a lot of the people that are because I may be a part of this organization, but I kind of feel like a fan more so, and the people that are truly fans of Houston High and what it's trying to do and what it's trying to accomplish. I think I speak for pretty much every single one of those people right now in saying thank you, because if we're not able to get this information out, if we're not able to do this thing, we're not going to see legalization this year. So you guys are part of the forefront on the fight, and that's just a beautiful thing that we're able to unify. Notice we're not arguing about these issues. We're all agreed. It's us trying to fight them on it. It's just crazy.
That's what we're trying to do, brother.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you guys for letting me spiel it. I know I sound like fucking Alex Jones on a rant. Like,
nah, man, it was great, brother. It was really great, man. Man, until next time, man. I'll catch you on the line, brother.
No problem. Stay faded, everyone.
Hey, stay.
Yeah.